the looming question that we are seeking to answer is, what is the business model for creatives? Because when you think about the space race or the Industrial Revolution, the biggest tool, the biggest thing powering the global economy are ideas, right? It's creators, creativity, fueling the way the world works. It fuels what we talk about. It fuels what we care about. It fuels the things that we are most passionate about, right? When I was a young 18-year-old, I went to Occidental College in LA. When I got to school, I had a whole idea of how I wanted to change the world through politics and economics and the different things that I wanted to do. And when I sat down with my advisor, I felt cocky and confident because I knew what I wanted to say. And I sat with him, and I told him this elaborate plan about how I was going to change the world and change culture through politics and economics, because I thought that's how you did it, right? You did it through politics and you did it through business. And after he heard me talk, the first thing he said to me, he said, "Julian, you're so passionate. I have no doubt that you won't accomplish everything you just said." But he was like, more importantly and more powerfully, you have ideas. And the way that your mind works, if you can master how to communicate those ideas and that way of thinking to anybody across any medium, there's no industry you can't conquer. There's no space you can't create, and there's no change in the world that you can't make happen. And at the time, I didn't understand exactly what that meant. Then fast forward, the vision he had for me ended up becoming my life, right? Creating spaces through advertising, through media, through education, through conversation, being able to make the change and create the spaces that I wanted to see, right? So as we get into this, we live in a time right now where more content is created and consumed than ever before, right? So media has become the most powerful industry in the world. Reaching hundreds of millions of people globally, media is seen as the source of information, insight, and human interest, right? When we wake up, we check our phones, we turn on the TV, we read the paper, we post to social media, we have conversations about what we've learned or what we've experienced. But at the same time, although media is arguably the most powerful industry in the world, we create and consume more than we ever have, there's still a huge and evident void in this generation. It's the most multicultural generation we've ever had in this country, right? If we just looked at the United States. But there are no mainstream media platforms that express or reflect the true diversity of this multicultural generation. There are no mainstream platforms that reflect the full scope of interests and values of this multicultural generation. There are no mainstream platforms that reflect the full scope of the missions, the movements, the passions that we hold close to our heart. More importantly, there are no mainstream platforms that really are owned, operated, and fueled by the new creative class, meaning they don't reflect the new ideas, the new ways of thinking, and the new spaces that we ultimately would want to create. So when we look at that, we see this void. So then what do we have? So then what we have today is an abundance of legacy platforms that represent a conventional way of thinking. So there's stories, conversations, perspectives, ideas that we've heard before, we've seen before. And what that does is that conventional way of thinking just feeds a cycle that perpetuates a common outlook on the world that's rapidly changing in real time, right? So our world is changing, but what we see are platforms and ideas that are not representing the full scope of that change, right? So then what we have is an abundance of legacy platforms that are more focused on being successful than effective, right? And there's a difference between successful and effective. Being successful would be amassing millions of followers, having a massive reach, generating hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. If you're a media company, you would consider that successful, right? We're successful. Effective is saying we're going to use this reach and this influence to intentionally drive culture forward, move conversations forward, and create spaces that didn't exist, or use that to make a maximum impact, right? So, to solve problems, to fill voids, right? Like that should be the purpose of a platform that seeks to be effective. So, while this void would seem to present a massive problem, it's actually presented our generation with an even greater opportunity, right? So when we talk about the new creative class, we're in a digital era. It's dominated by social media, real-time conversations. So the new creative class of the thinkers, the builders, the leaders represent across industries the new architects, the designers, the developers, the engineers who are shaping the culture that we want to see, right? Shaping what we value, shaping what we discuss, shaping what we deem to be important, right? So the new creative class are not just people who create cool content and do cool things on the internet, right? We're in a time where content is shifting from content as entertainment to content as utility, content as a service, meaning people want to be more informed, more enlightened, more inspired. When you open your phone, when you go to a platform, you want something that's going to make your life better in that moment, make your experiences better, enhance who you are, reflect what you care about, right? So, we're in a time where creativity is beyond a means of entertainment. We're in a time where creativity is not just a tool to market a brand. We're in a time where creativity is the tool to design what culture looks like. Culture reflects a community that is connected by shared values and interests, right? And each individual in here represents a culture. Every culture is defined by a distinct look, language, and lifestyle. And content fuels conversations, and conversations fuel culture. I'll say that again. Content fuels conversations, conversations fuel culture, right? So when you think about content fueling conversations and conversations fueling culture, it's also important to know that subcultures fuel pop culture, meaning that every mainstream movement, shift, trend started as a nuanced or niche trend or movement that was adopted by tastemakers, forward thinkers, before it then became adopted by the masses, right? Like that's how trends go from individual subculture to pop culture. Thus, creators and individuals like yourselves, who all have a unique viewpoint, a dynamic skill set, right? You are in position to shift paradigms, redefine business models, and redesign industries. Part of that is also understanding that you should never underestimate the power of your perspective, right? So everyday conversations that you have that you may feel like are trivial because it may be amongst you and your friends, it may be something you casually have that doesn't reach a massive audience, you may not have a huge Twitter following, right? But that one conversation can change the way people look at themselves, the way they look at the work they do, the way they look at what they're passionate about, the things they care about. It could change how people do business. So you should never underestimate the power of your perspective, right? So because of this, because this empowers creatives with unique perspectives and skill sets to be people who can shift paradigms, it makes it even more critical for the new creative class to change the way they see themselves. So you're not just people who contribute to cool moments within culture. You're not just people who create cool ad campaigns and cool videos and things like that, right? The new creative class should also see themselves as revolutionaries, visionaries, activists, right? Who can actually shape the movements, the conversations, the initiatives that people champion and rally behind and stand behind, right? Because the new creative class is also capable of solving real problems, paving new paths, and introducing unconventional ways of thinking. Now, to understand this viewpoint, we must first understand what content is, right? So we talked about how content can be anything, any message that can be created or shared across any medium. That can be a tweet, that can be a text message, an Instagram post, an email, an editorial story, right? A video, or a live stream, right? Content is also a form of communication. It's the expression of your unique viewpoint across any medium that can connect to anybody who shares your experience, shares your values and interests, and can connect to your message, right? And in addition to telling stories and sharing experiences, content also serves a myriad of purposes, right? It can provoke thought. It challenges convention. It inspires action, right? We talk about influence. Influence in this era, influence is being able to inspire people to take action, right? It's not about audience or follower count. It's really about you being able to push something forward, right? So it ignites movements. It builds community. It connects cultures, and it creates spaces that didn't previously exist. Content is the language that brands use to communicate, right? When you think about how brands engage and express themselves, content is the language they use to communicate. Content is also the language creators use to share their viewpoint. And as mentioned before, content is not a marketing tool in this era. Content has become the brand itself. When you think about Nike, right, for example, the ethos of Nike is representing the spirit of athletes who aspire to excellence. It's what Nike embodies, right? And more than the next Nike sneaker, more than the next jersey that releases, you're thinking about what's the next Nike ad, right? What's the next video? What's the next thing they're gonna post on their Instagram, right? You're looking for the content because the content represents the brand itself, right? Content embodies the values, the interests, and lifestyle of the brand. And the convergence today of media marketing and technology has changed the mechanics of building brands in the modern world, right? So as a result, when we talk about convergence, every creative industry, every main industry has taken a definitive step to the right? Like the music business is now the media business. The media business is the new advertising industry. The advertising industry is the new entertainment business. And technology has gone from simply being about developing hardware and software to being the source of distribution, right? Distribution platform. So now technology companies represent the mediums that allow you to translate messages to anybody, anywhere, on any device. So this convergence has completely shattered the boundaries that have divided these creative industries, right? So when you think about content creators, you're not divided by the spaces in which you create content. It used to be you're in media, you're in advertising, you're in technology, you're in these different spaces. That's not the case anymore, right? The walls have been shattered. So when you think of that, it's led to the next level of convergence, which represents one inclusive industry, right? The industry of ideas. No media, no advertising, no music business, no technology business. It's one industry. The industrialization of ideas, the industry of ideas, right? Then in developing your vision, it's also important to, as cross-disciplinary creatives, as convergence is happening, to also develop your skill set, to push yourself, to add elements to your game, right? To be able to see yourself beyond what you've normally saw yourself as capable of. And then with that, it's about finding the value then in your point of view, in your perspective, right? When we talk about not underestimating the power in it, it's understanding what value does my way of thinking add to these particular conversations, these different spaces, these industries, these areas that I'm passionate about, how does my unique perspective add unique value to those spaces? Then it's about translating that perspective, right? So using your different platforms, your mediums, to be able to clearly and authentically express that to an audience who can connect with it, right? And to create cultures and communities and groups around those shared values and interests, when we talked about how culture is created. And then that's understanding the power of media in that, right? So when you're intentional, when you create with purpose, when you understand your value, when you expand your vision, when you see yourself as an engineer, as an architect in these spaces, you then understand the power of media, how you can create trends through the stories you tell. You can create conversations through the things that you share. You can design new spaces, spark movements, do all of these things we spoke about just through the power of media, the power of creating content and sharing it across mediums, representing exactly who you are, right? Because we're getting to this space again of the industrializing of ideas. So if you aren't creating with intention, right? If you aren't being purposeful, if you aren't seeing yourself as the architect or the designer, then ultimately you become an employee or just a contributor to an industry that's going to leverage your ideas anyway, right? They're going to tell you what to do with your influence. They're going to tell you what to create with your platform, and you will feed the cycle. So either you're going to use your leverage or be leveraged, right? The creative economy is the new global economy. Again, to the industrializing of ideas, right? Ideas are what fuels every industry powering the global economy right now. So if you are contributing to that and you are creative and you have ideas, it's also important to understand how vital and influential and important your role is, right? And that's also the importance of ownership. Again, to owning your ideas, owning your platforms, owning the things that you put out into the world so that you can control and create an ecosystem, because the new appropriation is also acquisition. So it's about ownership as well, right? And so I will end with that. I want to thank you guys for your time and have a great rest of the evening.